My wife cheated and it went horribly wrong for her. Me and my wife just moved into a big city to start new jobs. Life was generally pretty good. We were in love, had love making regularly and never really argued too much. But everything changed when my wife met Jane at work. Jane worked directly with my wife and was the person she had the most contact with at work. They quickly became friends and initially I was happy she found someone she gets along with so quickly and can go out for drinks. But then it started to go downhill. Jane started trying to convince my wife that I was holding her back, that monogamy is no longer needed by women who have jobs, and that she should be hooking up with men way more conventionally attractive than me. I didn't know all this was going on until after, as mentioned at the start. Jane would always go on about my height, I am 5 feet 8 inches, and how I'm not traditionally masculine. I saw texts between them after the fact and Jane was describing the feeling of being with a more masculine man, how it's something every woman should experience, and asking my wife about me and how dominant I am. Granted I am not the most dominant guy in the bedroom, but I would be more than happy to do so if my wife had discussed this with me. This went on for months. At this point Jane was full on trying to convince my wife that I'm not good enough for her. She had learned from my wife things that I have supposedly done wrong and would labor on those points. For example, how I was unable to fix her car and had to call someone so she was late for an important meeting. I am not a mechanic but apparently men know how to fix cars. She was sending my wife content and podcasts to watch about relationships and women's needs in a relationship. Eventually, my wife started being reciprocal to Jane. This is when Jane upped the ante, started calling me horrible names to do with my height, and my wife just went along with it. From here, Jane moved on to her second stage. She introduced her to a guy, a traditionally masculine guy who was tall and muscular and supposedly better than me. So my wife was talking with him, started off platonic, but soon progressed to flirting, and eventually full-on love-making texting. Won't go into what he said but it was extremely detailed in what he would do to my wife. Unlike the woman I thought I knew, she seemed to love it, and they eventually began arranging to hook up. This is where things began to unravel for my wife. She was extremely stupid and booked a hotel using our joint card. I asked her about it and she said it was for work. I said, why on earth do you need a hotel 10 minutes away for work? She had not prepared for this and was like a deer in headlights. She said the company are having drinks there and people booked rooms to stay the night. I could tell she was lying. I assumed given everything Jane has been telling her she expected a guy like me to just roll over and not even question it. Now I was suspicious. A few days later when she was asleep I went through her phone and connected WhatsApp to my computer so I could have a proper look without her knowing. This is where I discovered all those messages. I didn't really know what to do at this point but the day of the hotel stay rolled around and I decided I had to confront her. So I did, and she wasn't even apologetic. In fact she said it is what she has needed for years and it may actually help our marriage. I told her if she walks out that door we are done. And she left after basically saying she doesn't care right now cause she's got him waiting for her. I didn't see my wife for the next 3 days. I resisted the urge to call her or beg her to come home, and was trying my hardest to go along with it. Then I got a call. It was from her company's HR department. They wanted me to go in for a meeting. When I arrived I sat down with 2 HR staff, and I guess one of the managers. They explained that I'm here as I need to be told as part of an ongoing investigation. That I have been spoken about using work communication systems and that the result of this was a huge fight between 2 employees. I was very confused and asked who the fight was between. They said my wife and Jane. They could sense I was even more confused and said that they will explain everything. Long story short, after my wife left that night the guy didn't show. My wife then found out that the guy she had been cheating on me with was not actually a guy, it was Jane catfishing her. When my wife found out she was at work and there was a huge fight, hence why I was there now to answer some questions. And that's the reason I said I can't believe this happened. My wife is now unemployed and has lost her husband because she got catfished. Crazy. She did get back in touch but it went how you might imagine. I may do an update if interested.
My foster parents treated me like crap, so I obliterated their reputation in our small town. My parents passed away in a hit-and-run car accident when I was 10 years old. My dad was only 39 and my mom 35. Neither of my parents had relatives who could take me in. We lived in a really small, church-going town where everyone knew each other. My dad had been the heir to a small fortune and so I didn't really have to work. He didn't like the big cities, so him and my mom decided to move to a small town where he could have an antique store. My mom was into collecting antiques. I would have had to go the orphanage route when they passed, but this couple from the church, who I will call Mr. and Mrs. Banks, made this big to-do in church about how a little girl needs a loving home, and God has given us this joyous task of bringing her up in our home and hearts. It's been a long time and I don't remember if those were Mrs. Banks' exact words, but they were something cringe-worthy like that. The Banks family had their own daughter Ella, who was a year older than me. That should have meant we would be super good friends, but Ella had her own thing going and always ignored me. The Banks received a stipend from the state to take care of me, but they also received checks every month from my dad's estate, which was supposed to take care of me until I was 18. When I did turn 18, I would receive full control of my parents' inheritance. The Banks weren't exactly cruel to me, but in private it was clear they were just using me to build up their reputation in our small town. In front of other people they'd fawn over me in a sick, cotton candy fashion that made me uncomfortable. They'd also make Ella be nice to me in public, which she hated. The Banks would also put on a big show whenever social workers came to check up on me. They'd coach me before the lady would come, and tell me to praise how godly and wonderful they were. After the social worker left, they'd go right back to ignoring me and spending my dad's money on anything they ever wanted. Nice dinners, vacations, etc. It was clear to me even as a teen that the Banks family were only using some of my endowment, both from the state and from my trust, to take care of me. The rest, they spent on themselves. As I grew older, I could see that my foster parents would pretend as though they had great business acumen and that's why they had more money and could buy a new Volvo. Where I'm from, a new Volvo is an event and take a trip to New York and buy fancy clothes for Ella. When I was 17, I noticed that my foster parents were stockpiling away my trust fund money to pay for Ella's tuition to college. Throughout this time, the banks would never outright say so, but would heavily imply that I owed them and that once I got control of my inheritance, that I should be godly and generous and give them some material compensation for all the work they did to raise me. I think they already got lots of material. Especially since Mrs. Banks practically stole all of my mom's antiques from her store and kept them for herself, gave them to Ella, or to her other relatives. One thing my mom never kept at her store was an extremely expensive, Baroque-era fine china set, absolutely complete and worth tens of thousands of dollars. Not a replica, but the real deal. So real, Napoleon Bonaparte himself might well have eaten the steak off those plates. Probably not, but you get the point. It was my china set of course, but Mrs. Banks thought I was an idiot and didn't know that. She would always talk about how this china set will go to Ella on her wedding day. Mrs. Banks assumed that since I always dressed like a tomboy, I didn't care for all my mom's antiques that Mrs. Banks stole or gave away, that I just didn't care about the china set. When I was a kid, my mom told me that things were just things, and never obsess over them. So, having the frou-frou china set for myself wasn't an issue. What was an issue was Mrs. Banks acting like it was hers to give away, which is so wrong. So, once Ella went off to college, thanks to my biological mom and dad's money, I had to make my own plans. I had always done well in school and had actually gotten a partial scholarship to attend school out of state. I could easily pay for with my inheritance, which I would very soon have control of. Per usual, Mr. and Mrs. Banks were telling me about how I owed them compensation and since I was going to be rich soon I ought to share the wealth. I figured that over the past 7 years they probably stole or misappropriated more than $200,000 of my parents' money, to say nothing of the state money they misused. I called the police on my boyfriend after he let his family live in my holiday home without my permission. For context, I inherited a holiday home from my grandma a while ago. I never really use it because it's roughly a 5-hour drive away from me. The keys to the holiday home are on a rack with literally every other key to anything my boyfriend and I own. The holiday house has a security system hooked up to my phone. When it detects someone on the property, cameras turn on and I can clearly see whoever it is. My boyfriend's brother recently had his 4th child. Him and his wife currently live in a nice apartment. So 3 days ago, they were both over me and my boyfriend's house with all their kids. He was talking about anything and everything, and I was holding the baby. My boyfriend's brother eventually mentioned how I have my holiday home and how it's more than enough space for him and his wife to raise their 4 kids. My exact response was, yeah, but I'm not going to let you live there. So he went quiet after that and his wife started to collect their kids and their things. They left about 5 minutes later. My boyfriend hasn't said a word to me about the conversation, yet I'm feeling bad about my response because I know they really do need the space. So fast forward to yesterday. I wake up for work and realize my boyfriend isn't laying next to me in our bed. Nothing out of the ordinary as he works from 8:30 in the morning. When I'm finally about to walk out the door, I go to grab my keys and I notice that the keys to the holiday home are missing. I look around for them and I can't find them, so I call up my boyfriend very confused. First time he doesn't answer. Second time he doesn't answer. Third time he finally answers. The conversation went something like this. Hey, have you seen my other house's keys? He said, yes, I have them. I said, cool, why would you have them though? He said, I grabbed them by accident. I'll return them when I get home from work. So I thought everything would be fine and I continued with my day and went to work. Everything was normal. Midday through the workday, I got a notification from the house's security system. I opened it and I see my boyfriend, his brother, and his family all outside the door with a moving van in the back. I was absolutely fuming. When I got home, my boyfriend was already there acting as if everything was normal. I started screaming at him, asking why the hell he moved his family into my house without my permission, after I told them no. He tried to justify it, saying that he had to help his family. It honestly made me even more angry. I told him that we're over, and he has one day to get his brother and his family out of my house or I'm calling the police on all of them for trespassing. This has all happened around 6 days ago. He hasn't called me or anything, but I fully intend to go through with my threat. The problem is that I know that they're struggling right now. This didn't stop me though. About 30 minutes ago, they came and returned my keys and let me know that the family had been told to leave. At first, they refused, but eventually they packed their things up and left. My now ex-boyfriend, his brother, and his brother's wife have been blowing up my phone non-stop asking why the hell I'd put them and their children through all of this. Guess what? I blocked them all. I feel absolutely terrible about what I did and I know that there was probably better ways to handle the situation. I even considered letting them stay after all to avoid the drama. But I'm not sure if they would pay rent or anything. For the future, I plan to rent the home out. But now I'm not sure how my ex-boyfriend's family would take that. I refused to help my stepsister with her house purchase because of how her stepfather treated me as a child. I'm 29 female. When I was about 10, my mom got married to my stepfather. I have an older brother Luke who was 15. My stepfather had Amy and Bella who were 12 and 11. We didn't come from a privileged background. My mom was a minimum wage worker and my dad was absent. Our stepfather had very good income. Their deal was that they wouldn't combine finances, and both would each contribute equally to the household, and then each takes care of their children with their spare money. My mom never had enough spare money for us, while my stepfather was spending big on his kids. This included holidays which Luke and I were excluded from, and my stepfather would pay for my mom, but never us. Luke and I also shared a room even though Amy and Bella had their own rooms and we had a guest room, because stepfather insisted that he was paying more towards the house so my mom's share would only get her one room for the kids. Luke and I were constantly teased for this situation by the three of them as we grew up. My mom always told us that we should be grateful because if it wasn't for our stepfather, we would not be living in a nice home in a very good neighborhood. Luke and I became determined to be able to take care of ourselves so that we wouldn't need to take nonsense from anyone anymore. We have both done quite well with our careers and finances and we are in a very good place. Since turning 18 and moving out, my relationship with the three of them has been very limited. I wouldn't call us friends, but we can exist peacefully if we are in the same place. I visited my mom recently and my stepfather mentioned that Amy wants to buy a house now that she's pregnant. He asked me if I'm able to help out a little with the deposit. The house is $500,000 and she needs a $150,000 deposit. She has $100,000 so far. $25,000 on her own. $25,000 from her mom and $50,000 from stepfather. He was asking if Luke and I can help cover the extra $50,000. And he said he'd pay us back as part of the inheritance eventually. I said, no. He insisted that Luke and I both own our houses outright and with our income. So we should be able to help. I said whether I can or not is irrelevant. My answer is no. And it will stay that way. He reminded me that Luke and I each gave $10,000 to our cousin for buying a house as a gift. Amy is my sister and he's offering to pay us back. I said, that was our choice then. This is my choice now. He insisted that we should be willing to help out our family if we're able to. I looked him in the eyes and said, like how you helped me and Luke when we were kids. Everyone just went quiet when I said this. After a while, he said if we went back in time he would have done things differently, treated all four of us equally. I said that's good of you but doesn't make you entitled to my money now. He said he knows he is not entitled, that's why he's asking and promising to pay it back. I said the answer still is no, not entitled to a loan either. My mom later told me I could have turned him down without being a jerk or bringing up childhood which he already feels guilty about. Am I the jerk here?